Hi, everyone. It's good to see you again. I'm Anne-Marie Green.
And I'm Vladimir Duthiers. CBS News projects Senator Bernie Sanders as the winner of the New Hampshire primary. He is one step closer to taking on President Trump in November after winning nearly 26% of the vote yesterday.
Moderate candidates Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar trailed Sanders to round out the top three. However, Buttigieg still has the most delegates after last week's narrow victory in Iowa. Ed O'Keefe has the latest.
After the mess in Iowa last week, New Hampshire brought some clarity to the presidential race. There were clear winners and losers, and a handful of candidates who dropped out, while others got out of here as fast as they could to focus on the next contests.
Thank you, New Hampshire!
Senator Bernie Sanders claimed victory and Democratic frontrunner status in the Granite State.
This victory here is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump.
His closest competitor, former Mayor Pete Buttigieg, congratulated his opponents, but noted he's here to stay.
One day, books will tell not just of one election, but of the era that began with you here in New Hampshire.
But it was Senator Amy Klobuchar's third-place finish that couldn't have been predicted until the last few days.
Hello, America. I'm Amy Klobuchar, and I will beat Donald Trump.
Klobuchar rode a wave of momentum after a strong performance in last Friday's debate.
I came back and we delivered.
CBS News exit polls found half of Democratic primary voters in New Hampshire decided on their candidate in the last few days. 29% of those who waited went with Buttigieg and 24% Klobuchar, while Sanders led among those who decided earlier.
We are taking on billionaires, and we're taking on candidates funded by billionaires.
It was a disappointing finish for Senator Elizabeth Warren, though she vowed to move forward.
Our campaign is built for the long haul, and we are just getting started.
And sensing a poor finish, former Vice President Joe Biden fled New Hampshire early for South Carolina, where he believes he'll have more support.
It ain't over, man. We're just getting started.
But for some candidates, they decided it was over. Businessman Andrew Yang, who qualified for all but one Democratic debate, announced he's suspending his campaign.
You know, I am the math guy, and it is clear tonight from the numbers that we are not going to win this race.
Colorado Senator Michael Bennet also dropped out of the race, and we expect that former Massachusetts Governor Deval Patrick will announce his exit later today. The next contest is Nevada, followed by the primary in South Carolina later this month. Anne-Marie and Vlad?
All right, Ed, thank you. So for more on this, let us bring in CBSN political reporter Caitlin Huey-Burns. She's with us from Manchester, New Hampshire. So, Caitlin, how significant is Senator Bernie Sanders' victory here in New Hampshire? On top of Iowa, he, looks like he's sort of gaining some more speed, even though Iowa, I think, was a little bit of a hit for him. But right. How's it looking for him?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a significant victory for the campaign and an important one in terms of gathering delegates and being able to have that momentum going into the next contest, which will happen out west in Nevada. The Sanders campaign has been organized here on the ground for a long time. Remember, he won here overwhelmingly in 2016 and has been trying to build up on that support heading into this cycle. So he has also been able to help start to really consolidate the more progressive wing of the party and be able to really continue his strong support among those who have been with him for a while. I think the question, though, however, is how he expands his base of support, because when you look at the numbers that he got last night and then you add up the numbers that Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg were gathering, the more moderate wing seems to have a little bit more support when you look at those numbers. So the question for Bernie Sanders moving into states like Nevada, where there will be a caucus, where organization does matter a lot, which he has, I think there is this question about how he is going to be able to expand his base of support.
So a couple of things, Caitlin. Pete Buttigieg and Senator Amy Klobuchar finished closely behind Senator Sanders. The three sort of major center-left candidates, Buttigieg, Klobuchar, and Biden, got 53%. The Sanders-Warren camp got 36%. So I'm wondering what you read into those numbers and what does it mean for Vice President Biden going forward?
That's right. I think after former Vice President Biden packed up yesterday and went straight to South Carolina before the results here in New Hampshire came in, I think shows that their campaign has to do well in South Carolina. Remember, that state has been his firewall, considering that he does very well or has strong support among African American voters. But his poor showings here in New Hampshire and in Iowa the week before do raise questions about that central pitch that he's been making on the campaign trail of electability. I think there are questions about his electability if he wasn't able to win over voters in Iowa and New Hampshire, especially because he's been campaigning as someone who can win back those voters who picked Obama and then transferred over to Donald Trump in 2016. So I think that was a sign that the campaign knows it has to go all in South Carolina. But I also think that with the rise of Pete Buttigieg, with the rise of Amy Klobuchar, those more moderate voters, or those who maybe have been more inclined to Joe Biden, have shown that they are willing and ready to look elsewhere. And I think you can say that Buttigieg and Klobuchar have been gaining support as Joe Biden has been falling.
So then, if more moderate Democrats are sort of dividing their vote amongst several candidates, what's happening with the more progressive Democrats? Why is the vote not being divided between Sanders and Elizabeth Warren? Why is she doing so poorly?
Well, it's really interesting because, you know, we think of voters in terms of, or these candidates in terms of lanes, but I don't think that voters really think about it the way that we do. Yes, you definitely see an alignment of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren when it comes to ideology, when it comes to policy. When you talk to voters on the ground in these early states, and you see this reflected in a little bit of our polling, you know, they want different things. I talked to a lot of voters here who had been supporting Elizabeth Warren, but were also interested in Amy Klobuchar as they saw her gain momentum because they wanted a woman on the top of the ticket. I think you can also say that there was some overlap in support among those who were supporting Pete Buttigieg and those who may have been supporting Elizabeth Warren early on, college-educated voters as an example. So as we've seen Elizabeth Warren fall, we have seen Bernie Sanders rise, especially among the most liberal voters of the party. But I think you have to also look when you're assessing Elizabeth Warren's downfall, at least at this stage in the campaign. And I caution, we still have a lot more to go here. Only we still have 98% of the delegates left to be allocated. So still a lot more race left to be had here. But I think when you look at her downfall in these two early states and you look at the rise of a Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar, I think that contributes to it as well.
So, Caitlin, the other sort of story that we, in those who cover politics, have been talking about is former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg. The president tweeting about Bloomberg yesterday in New Hampshire. Headline, of course, Michael Bloomberg was not involved in the primary at all. He didn't appear in the primary, but he is looking towards a Super Tuesday. And what I find kind of interesting is that Mayor Bloomberg is doing better with African American voters, even given sort of his problematic track record here in New York City with black New Yorkers, whereas Joe Biden, the same number that Bloomberg is rising with black voters, former Vice President Biden is falling. So
and I don't even know how much outreach Bloomberg is really doing.
Well, he's spending a ton of money, right? You hear the former Vice President saying, look, he wishes he could spend the amount of money that Michael Bloomberg is spending, especially in states where some of these campaigns aren't even present yet. The question, though, Caitlin, and it's sort of a nuanced one, a lot of people are saying, well, it's because he's spending a lot of money. But that sort of disparages, I think, black voters who they want to see someone who can beat Donald Trump. And if they think that this guy can do it,
just like most Democrats
exactly, then they're going to get behind that. It has nothing to do with the money that they're spending.
I think that's exactly right, Vlad. And when you look at, you know, again, talking to voters on the ground, being in these early states, you see across all divides in this party, the number one thing uniting all of these Democratic voters is that electability question, is finding a candidate that can defeat Donald Trump. Had a lot of discussion over policy, a lot of discussion about different kinds of things in this Democratic primary. But again and again, voters say that they're willing to put aside any sort of policy differences they may have with a candidate in favor of finding someone who can defeat Donald Trump, because they say without that, nothing gets done. None of these policy arguments that they're having get done without Donald Trump not being there. That's the Democrats' view. And so I think that's what's really contributing to Bloomberg's rise here, and the rise of some of these other Democrats. I mean, when you look at the closing arguments that they've been making in these battleground states, in these early primary and caucus states, it's that question. They're all talking about uniting the party and being able to win. You're also saw that from Elizabeth Warren in the closing days of the campaign as well. So I think that's exactly it, and I think that's a force not to underestimate as we move forward.
Yeah, and real quick before we let you go, Caitlin, 30 seconds. I mean, what can we say about Andrew Yang, who suspended his campaign yesterday?
Yeah.
But and you know, it was he sort of broke the model for what a candidate in the Democratic Party could look like. You know, he wasn't white. He talked about he sort of had a different platform than some of the others. So, what do you make of his campaign, and what does it bode for the Democratic Party going forward in the future?
That's right. I think when you talk to Democrats, they say that Andrew Yang had a very positive influence on this primary process. And you're right to note that in the next debate, it will likely be only white candidates. And that's something that the party will have to grapple with. I can say, though, after interviewing Andrew Yang a couple of nights ago, I asked him, you know, he's been having a lot of fun on the campaign trail. I asked him if there was something that he was most surprised about, or what he saw as the strangest kind of moment on the campaign trail. And he said that he's seen a lot of his supporters tattoo his face onto their calves.
Wow.
So there's a lot of Andrew Yang tattoos out there. So you can argue that his campaign has been suspended, but he will live on for a while, I think.
Yeah. All right, Caitlin, thank you very much as always. Appreciate it.
Good to see you. Thanks.